Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Wyant, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software Great Tech Group. You're invited to join our conversation to model the future of construction innovation and the digital transformation adventure of this great industry. My guest today is Ben Meyer. He serves as the Building Enclosure Business Director for Siplast. He also serves as the chair of ASRAE 91 Envelope Committee, director of the Air Barrier Association of America, the member at large at the NIBS BETEC board, and past lead technical committee member, as well as a past technical advisor of the lead materials tag. You're a busy guy. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a lot of things going on.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love seeing the involvement throughout the industry. So, how did you get into the world of construction?
So I'm an architect by trade. So that was my way in. But, as even before then, I always enjoy, putting things together. I always describe, my wife's in the medical field and I'm in construction, and we both of them are about solving problems. I just really don't like blood. So that kind of led me down the construction path. Um, so that was, at an early crossroads. That's where I went
Mm-hmm.
into it. But I've been kind of in and around construction, building, in my whole life.
Yeah, that's awesome. Uh, what gripped you about construction to not only bring you in, but keep you in it?
Yeah, no, and I think what I love about architecture, and even now I'm more on the business side of architecture, but I think what it's a training to really solve complicated problems. Like the
Yeah.
construction process is an unbelievably complex problem. So there's that's always intriguing. It's never goes the same way twice. Trying to figure out how to get the best way to get from A to B, um, and make something. Make a beautiful building, a big project, solve a problem.
Hmm.
I love that part of it, and they're not little problems, right? They're very big problems that you kind of have to piece together with lots of little solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think people, no matter where they fit in the industry, are just amazing creative problem solvers. Because at the end of the day, that's the job. You got to figure out how to create something super complex and kind of make it simple, but keep the complexity in there too. And that's it's an interesting challenge for people.
And that's what I loved about architecture in college is that you go through high school and you do all you do calculus, you try to do really well in your grades, and then in freshman in architecture they have some of the best and brightest students, and they really say, all right, we're not going to do any of that right now. We're going to reset, and you guys are going to learn for a year how to work together as a team.
Yeah.
you know Buildings are kind of secondary. The first thing you have to do is figure out how to solve weird complicated problems, on a daily basis, and sometimes on a nightly basis if it's an architecture. It's day and night, because that's the foundation. Like that's how you go forward and actually do great designs and build great buildings. Is you have to figure out how to work in various scenarios with people, and
Sure.
that's I think they do a great job with that from
Yeah.
an education standpoint.
Any lessons learned on the collaboration side of kind of pitfalls to avoid?
Oh, on the collaboration, I mean, I think a lot of it is being open to asking questions before you jump to providing answers, because many times our inclination to provide a solution is precedes our understanding, right? And so
Mm,
we have to kind of first understand the problem. And I think that people very quickly try to get to solution mode before we really have a solid foundation about what is the problem we're trying to solve. Because it's not always an engineering problem. It could be a design problem that we have, something occurring before something else, that we could have probably handled in design, or really thinking ahead of time, that would alleviate a lot of burdens down the road, that we don't have to kind of jump through more hoops if we lay it out right up front.
mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. So one of the uh, kind of challenges that comes with complexity and the kind of the rhythms that we get in construction is getting in our ruts, if you will.
Yeah.
Uh, what do you say when somebody says to you, "Well, this is the way we've always done it, so we're going to keep doing it"?
That's one of the things that I've battled my whole career, and especially on the main, in design side. You'd come to a contract. This is the design we want. Well, that's not how we do it. And the same is true on the manufacturer side. As new codes come along, and there's the requirements are changing. They'll say, well, we've done it this long we've done it this way for 30 years. We've never had a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of those, like, for me, is like a false statement. Like if you say that, that tells me that you aren't really paying attention to what's happening around you, because everything's always changing. If you've done it this way for 25 years, my first inclination is that's not true. right? The
Yeah.
world is constantly changing. It's incremental changes. But if you went back and looked at what you were doing 25 years ago, probably has nothing to do with what you're doing today, either with the types of crews you're using, the types of materials, the codes you're following. It's completely different today. And the idea that, well, it's been the same, so we can't change, is just not true. Like, it's always changing. When I hear somebody say that to me, it tells me that they don't like change, but change is inevitable, and it's part of how we go through and make buildings better, safer, more energy efficient, and that's been happening for years.
Yeah. How do you kind of work on that, the change management side to get people more comfortable with change? Because as you said, you know, a lot of people are not in love with change. They like other people to change, but they don't want to change
Right.
themselves. So how do you win them over of like it's not that scary? Change is happening all the time. It'll
Right, and
be all
that's
right.
part of, it just kind of when they say that, we've done this way for this many years, we've never had a problem. A lot of it is kind of, rather than kind of jumping to a solution, we should do this instead. It's really trying to understand, well, what are you worried about? Because
Mm,
that they're worried about something, and trying to figure out, well, one, get on the same page that, well, it has been changing for years. Maybe you really like this one particular application method, but over the last 15 years, all the materials have changed, the standards have changed. There's been consolidated and different chemistries. Um, so what is it about it? Is it the application method you're worried about? Is it the material type? Trying to get to the root of what's bringing that anxiety, what made them react in that way to say, oh no, I can't do that.
hmm
I think that helps you kind of narrow in on, all right, well, it's more about that they really like, using this type of application method. The materials themselves have been changing for years. What we've done 30 years ago, you can't go out to a store and buy 30-year-old materials. Like, they're not there.
Right. Yeah. So kind of leaning into that a bit more.
Yeah.
Obviously there are people resistant to change, especially when it comes to maybe adopting some new codes and practices. The big kind of push right now in the industry is obviously around kind of sustainability and going carbon neutral. What do you believe needs to happen to change people's minds and maybe encourage them for kind of greater acceptance of these new codes and practices?
Yeah, it's a big question, because I do a lot of work with the energy code. So ASHRAE 90.1 is essentially the basis behind the commercial energy code for commercial buildings. And it's a fascinating thing, because the requirements for making changes in that standard is everything has to be cost effective and feasible, at the time that the change is made. And currently, we're working on the 2025 cycle of that standard, whereas most of the world, even most of the U.S., is still
Mhm.
operating on a version of that standard that's 15 years old. And so we're trying to figure out what's cost effective today to drive the industry forward for energy savings. Well, by the time people actually get to use it, it's gone through 3 cycles, and it's 12 years later. It's really cost effective, but there's still resistance. Oh, well, we can't do that. That's going to cost us money. And again, what a lot of time was that what that means is, I didn't read ahead. I don't know what's going to be. So any change costs me something, even if it's better for me, better for the industry. If I have to change, there's a cost to it, and it may
Mhm.
just be, personal cost, pride. It could be, I have to change some processes, but in the end, it will save energy, save money, save time. So part of that is trying to figure out, well, what are you worried about? Is it the process? Is it the fact that you're just not keeping up to date with what's current in the industry? And then a lot of that's really about, how do we enable that? How do we execute on things that we know are cost effective that aren't being practiced today? And that could come down to, enforcement and education at the trade level, at the building official level, all of those things, to really adopt the things that we already know work. I mean, that's one of the challenges. That's what drives me a little bit crazy. Is we're, as an industry, we're developing for 2030 these standards. We're only 2 cycles out from 2030 from an energy code perspective.
Mhm.
Um, but most folks, municipalities are pretty far off in adopting those. And so, kind of what we know we can get to, and what people are willing to take on and really understand how it impacts them. That's a big gap there.
Yeah. So how do you uh, bridge that gap to help
Yeah.
create greater education and the come alongside of them for on the enablement side?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it is just kind of getting on the same page. I do a lot of education around, the current standards for energy,
Hmm.
for sustainability, things like that. And that's one of the things that I say all the time, is when people are saying, hey, we're doing a lead version 4 4.1 building, whatever it is, and we want to get so many energy credits, the first thing I'll say is, well, the easiest, best way to do that is, the LEED version 4.1 uses ASRAE 2016 as its baseline. So if you need to save energy from that ASRAE 2016 baseline, there's an ASRAE 2019 and an ASRAE 2022 that have established that there's 15% energy savings just by following the standard, and they're all cost effective.
Mm.
So like that's the easiest first jump. You don't have to think very hard at all. All the thinking's been done for you. But part of that is just recognizing like, oh, if I just look ahead a little bit, somebody's already done the work.
Yeah.
I don't have to, it's not a problem that I have to put my head down and say, figure out, do I need a certain kind of elevator? Do I need to, adjust my design? All of those solutions exist. Now, if you want to go beyond that, that might take a little bit of creative solution, but don't reinvent what's already been done and proven to be cost effective.
Yeah. So if it already exists, where's the gap falling short, do you think, of maybe on the awareness side of people knowing kind of where to go and the roadmap to follow? If it's already there, why aren't they?
Yeah, so it's state by state, municipality by municipality. So some states are a little bit more forward thinking, like
Sure.
like Washington State and Maryland. Part of it is just how they've built their infrastructure to adopt current codes that have been, passed by a consensus body, evaluated by the Department of Energy as cost effective. Once it crosses those hurdles, it's automatic for them. So that conversation about it's scary doesn't happen in those particular. It comes on, and it's part of how they just adopt cycles.
Mm-hmm.
The other end of the spectrum are folks that don't have a process to really adopt and really recognize what's current, what's effective, and then it becomes much more of a political argument versus it's fact based.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's when it goes from fact based to political, you really have to separate those two and say, well, is our goal to do this or not? Because if we just want to argue about things, that's easy to do. We can do that all the time.
Our culture never argues about things.
Right.
It's a favorite pastime right now.
In some ways, that can be sport, and it's like, well, let's not make this the entertainment. Let's just do the thing we want to do.
Yeah, agreed. What do you see as kind of some key challenges and complexities in that journey towards the carbon neutrality, and how do you tackle them?
So it's a long list, right? And that's part of it. It's like at its core, at the foundation, a lot of it is, making that adoption as automatic as possible, just so that we don't have to kind of debate the little things, because it's a big problem we're trying to solve. And if you get into the nitty gritty of every window, every door, every U value, you're never going to get there, because it's really a system problem. And that's the way we develop the standards, is really in a system solution. So as much as you can kind of automate that as much as possible, and then you can really focus your energy on bringing the building officials up to speed, the designers up to speed, the trades, so that when it comes online, everybody has kind of a clear understanding of what do I need to do? Like, what do I need to look for? Like, from the designer's perspective, what changed? What do I need to, what new drawings do I need to include? What, inspection schedules or should I expect? And then on the building official side too, I mean, to their credit, like they're worried about, the project that's on the books right now. When a code change happens, they have to, like, well, bring the new book out. Let's see what's in there. They're trying to figure out what's new. What do I need to look for? They have to build whole systems around that. So as much as we can, make the cost effective changes to the energy standards, as the rest of the process can come along with it, so that there's ways to inform the designers, ways to inform the reviewers, ways to inform the trades. This is what needs to happen in order for these changes to go into effect.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of, I think, tribal knowledge that people have to kind of build and experience and get it wrong a few times before it actually gets effective in the market right now. And the shorter we can make that cycle, the better.
Yeah, makes sense. I want to drill into that a bit more. So let's say people they're bought in on paper.
Yeah,
they're committed. They're wanting to change. All that stuff. But how do you bridge the gap again in terms of what's on paper and the reality of everything hitting the road and implementing it on site?
Yeah, and what I found is most times it requires a good story. You need a success story to, like, get everybody over the hurdle of, when you have it on paper and conceptually, oh, this is going to save us energy. You have folks who have essentially done it, and LEED has done a really good job of creating those use cases before the market was ready for it. So that's so LEED is one. There's a few others, but passive house that developed the use case. They built the buildings. No, it didn't fall down. Nobody went bankrupt. They were able to do it, and they actually saved energy. That kind of gives people something to look at and say, all right, it's not as scary and dangerous as I feel because it's different. Like this is possible, whether or not you go through that entire process or not. But you can kind of see it and say, all right, dude, it is possible. It's effective. Let's make sure we do those things.
Yeah. So another kind of side of that coin, and on first blush, sustainability efforts and remaining competitive. It seems like people put that as a dichotomy against each other and have it as conflicting priorities in business. How have you managed to strike a balance between those two aspects and not have them competing, but really kind of serving as complementary efforts?
Yeah, I mean, and even when I was in practice, and I worked for a real estate developer, lead was a tool. It was a way to differentiate what would be otherwise be commodity apartments, commodity office space. It was a tool to say, hey, these are well designed. These are considered, so it can make help the customer understand that there is a difference. So I think in that way, we can't think of them just as cost additive. Like they create value for the building, for the user. Like passive house is a great example, especially in public housing or where there's shared utilities. There's a real benefit to the user to want to rent a space that's in a passive house building, because that you get to keep money in your pocket. Like that there's value in that's beyond how many dollars per square foot does it rent at.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. Really interesting. So kind of as someone that's really actively involved in all the sustainability initiatives and really helping drive that in the industry, what advice do you like to give other businesses as they embark on this journey? Are there any kind of key steps to get started?
I'm going to say try to be as nice as possible. So especially in kind of driving the industry forward and working with codes, standards, and even like I call them voluntary compliance work. Like lead and passive house, where you're
Mm-hmm.
voluntarily complying with something that's beyond code, which is a good thing to do. Like code is it the worst you can do without being put in jail. Like that, if you say, hey, it meets code, that doesn't mean it's incredibly safe. That means that's the bare minimum, and it's not illegal, right? Anything less than that is illegal. So
Yeah.
like kind of to put that framework out there, like code isn't the goal. It's not the high bar. It's the lowest bar. Like you should be stepping over that. So
Mm-hmm.
the question is, what are you doing beyond code? Um, so in that framework, one of the things that I always try to encourage, folks that work with us or people we're trying to work with is what are our common goals? Like what are we trying to accomplish that's high level? Because if you get too tactical and you say, hey, we sell insulation, we really want to sell more insulation, that's not that helpful, right? You're not there's no value to the user, to the designer, to the industry in that way. It's like what value are you bringing to the market, to the process, and let's focus on that, because that value is everyone can kind of get behind that. But if it's really like I really like this product and not that product, it's not really a position that is you could stand on.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So I want to shift a bit. Let's talk futures. So 2030, it's a big year. Everybody's been pushing for the 2030 challenge and all that stuff. Uh, do you think we're on pace? And will people really be ready when 2030 comes along? Because it's not that far away anymore.
I think it's a really interesting question. So like, so I'm the chair of the ASRAE envelope committee. So we're responsible, to develop the standards that get us to a 2030 net zero. I think we're 2031 because of our cycles are on a 3 year and it lands on a 31. Um,
Close enough.
but even so, we're working on 2025 right now. And so the idea, we've over our cycles are every 3 years, and we've had cycle over cycle, we saved between five, and the last cycle that was a big jump because we added credits was about 15%, and we still have another. And so we're saving over each version, between 5-12%. Um, the next cycle, we're halfway into it. There's
Mhm.
there's not a huge jump coming unless something magical happens. So like that's to continue that pathway. It gets harder and harder the closer and closer you get. Especially our charge is to be cost effective, and that's a hard thing. You can do it very easily, not cost effective. And when I say cost effective, I mean we actually we use a very if we were, money lenders, we'd use the same formula. It's a net present value formula based on the life cycle of the technology and what it costs to implement. So it's a very well designed, cost effective formula, not just, hey, I think that's expensive. We're looking at net present value and its payback and over the life cycle of that technology. But as we get closer, it gets really hard, and so there's got to be a lot of big changes to get us all the way there. Not to say it's not possible, and I would say from the 90 from ASRAE's perspective in 90.1, we're on a path that leads there. The real
Mhm.
challenge is, I'm talking about the version that we published, that standard. So we're working on 2025. When it publishes in, I guess a year and a half now, the question is how many people are going to be using that? How many people are going to be current with the technology that we know will get us there? It's going to be very few. I mean, even today, if folks that are listening are doing this, how many are even using 2019's version of that, which is, I would consider, beyond what most folks have adopted. And there's a 2022 that published almost 2 years ago.
Mhm.
At 15% energy savings over the 2019 version. And so for me, the biggest thing that keeps us from hitting our 2031 goal is how quickly we are willing to adopt and create systems to take on the knowledge that we know we can transfer out.
Mhm. What do you think the main kind of hurdle is for people to get current and adopt the codes?
This may be somewhat controversial, but there's been a fixation over the last 2 years on carbon.
Uh-huh.
So I've done a lot of work on embodied carbon, operational carbon. Um, Carbon is one thing, and there's many factors that go into hitting our goals around energy savings. So an overfixation on carbon can lead, in my opinion, to suboptimal solutions. You're gonna optimize for something that may or may not help you hit the goal you want to hit, and I think
Mhm.
that's part of the challenge. So in order to hit the 2030 goals, you have to kind of separate the embodied carbon and the operational carbon. We're in the building industry. Our buildings are meant to live a long time. So the operational carbon, the energy use, operational carbon and energy use, they're almost synonymous. So
Mhm.
the embodied piece of it can be a fixation that doesn't have as big of an impact, that can be a real detractor, a real distraction from actually implementing change. So that's one that both are important, but I think we have to keep focus on, if we want to hit the goal. We want these buildings to operate for 100 years. We're still back to the basics. It's still energy efficiency. It's still implementation. It's all those things. Carbon is the problem we're trying to solve for, but we can kind of go down a rabbit hole and get stuck on it and not actually solve the problem we're aiming at.
Yeah. No, I think that that's it's wise advice because that's just a kind of a general rule with goals. If you have the big goal that you're looking for, but you get focused on kind of one aspect of it, you're
Yeah.
gonna veer off path. You got to be able to see the forest and the trees kind of at the same time.
And this is what I mean. I can appreciate the conversation, but at the same time, the more we talk about the embodied carbon of one type of steel versus another type of steel, we've missed the point, because steel is not saving any energy on our building.
Yeah.
So like in the long term, that building is going to operate and that steel is going to be there. That's going to go out in the wash in terms of the rounding. How well we do with the energy efficiency, the operation, and even the serviceability of things that save energy, way bigger importance.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. So let's say we get to 2030. Let's just, in a perfect world, we're there. Okay, everybody, the industry as a whole is really close to 2030. What then?
Well, I think that's part of having a bigger picture, and not getting fixated on carbon as a metric. Because I think
Hmm.
if you do that, if you go down that rabbit hole and you stay there and you optimize for one thing, 2030, we're going to turn around and say, wow, we have a lot of, you know, you do our energy sources are going to be, how is it coal fired? Is it nuclear? Is it dams? Well, if we shift away from one to go to the other, there's downsides to all of those things.
Hmm.
So if you go away from coal and you shift everything to hydropower, well, there's a lot of lost land. I mean, it's not that comes from hydropower, and so there's an impact. It's not carbon, but it's something else. And so that's one of the things that if you optimize for a single thing, you're going to end up costing something else. And so that's the risk. So the more balanced you can be as you get to the goal, the better place you'll be once you hit the goal and turn around and say, oh, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Um, so
Yeah.
that's something to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a ton of sense. So doing a callback from the beginning, how we started the conversation around the collaboration angle, what role does collaboration and partnerships play in achieving all these goals and really kind of stepping up and keeping it um, sustainable, not necessarily in terms of carbon and everything, but keeping it uh, the initiatives sustainable that they keep going.
Right, and I think that's a huge part of this because there are a lot of folks who are involved, engaged right now because they're worried about carbon, and it's really about global. Kind of backing up a step, we're worried about global warming. Carbon
Mm-hmm.
is one of the things that leads to global warming, but there's lots of other, secondary impacts that drive it. So part of it is, keeping everybody engaged. If somebody's at the table because they are worried about carbon or they're really engaged in the embodied side, it's not kind of shutting it out, but kind of giving it a context and a pathway to say, all right, this is what you're worried about. This is the thing that's most effective that can help us save energies and also apply those principles. Um, but having kind of a balanced field. So if everybody comes with one concern, comes to the same table, you're going to get one answer, and it's not necessarily going to be well received.
Yeah. How do you spark those conversations and the collaboration to go more in depth than just staying at the surface level?
Yeah, we do a lot of that at ASRAE 90.1. A lot of it's driven by the Department of Energy. So even in the 2025 version, there will be a carbon metric as part of our cost effectiveness. And so that we're doing that already in terms of having all the stakeholders. But part of it is kind of getting to a foundational level of kind of trust and understanding. There's a lot of arguing, a lot of debate to kind of get everybody on the same page. So that's part of the process. You can't kind of run away from it. And you also can't kind of say, well, this is what I believe and everybody else can go away. Like you have to be able to state it and then listen to the feedback. And I think that's one of the things from kind of going back to kind of foundational architectural education. That's what that first year is up until that point, most folks are A students and they, would do their tests, they turn in their papers and they get their grades back. The fundamental difference about architecture is you do your work, you put it on the wall and we all talk about it. And that's a very uncomfortable place to be. But that's part of the point is that that's the only way you really get better is you have to be able to do what you worked on and be able to receive feedback, like critical feedback, because everybody generally wants you to do better.
Yeah.
Right? But it can feel very personal, and I think that's part of the challenge is to be able to receive that feedback and then make adjustments.
Right. Well, it's just being able to uh, understand that everybody at the end of the day is on the same team,
Yeah,
going for the same goal. You're coming at it from different angles with different perspectives and even different priorities, but everybody's trying to get
yeah,
the building built the best way possible.
and that's one of even to be a good giver of feedback. The first step is to really understand what problem were they trying to solve.
Yeah.
Right? You can't say, well, this is how I would have solved it. You say, no, no, what problem were they trying to solve? Did they do the best job they could have with the problem they were trying to solve? And then you can give feedback that's meaningful because you have to put yourself in their shoes to give them actual feedback that they could have used to make their problem better versus saying, hey, you should have done a different problem. You should have ignored that entirely and done something else.
Yeah.
And so I think
That's
that
good
both
stuff. Harder to implement in reality, but it's super valuable when it's done well.
yeah, that was I so when kind of back to the architecture. So I was in my graduate year as my job was to teach freshmen. Having gone through it, I kind of forgot how painful that was to go
Mm.
kind of learn how to give and receive feedback. And that becomes the primary objective is teaching very smart kids how to give and receive feedback. And it's grueling. It's a grueling thing to do as an adult, and every day. But you kind of have to say, kind of check yourself and say, look, they're not attacking me. They want to help me do better. So how can I accept that feedback?
Yeah. Yeah, you got to embrace the uncomfortable, uneasy feeling and kind of
But that's how
be
you
okay to be vulnerable.
that's how you make a solid team. That's how you solve hard problems. It's the only way to do it.
For sure.
If you just kind of put up your blinders and say this is what the world needs to do, nothing will get done.
Yeah. Totally agree. So as we start to land the plane, some rapid fire questions for you. What is the phrase modeling the future? What does that mean and look like to you?
I don't know that phrase. Is that so? It's modeling the future.
Modeling the future.
I think maybe that's kind of as we project into forward, kind of how accurate is our simulation, right? And the
Uh,
more accurate we can be, and some of that's kind of being a little pessimistic, right? And also the optimism. Where can we be? and seeing how those two interact. If I think the better we can refine that model, the better off we'll be able to direct our efforts today.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. What does innovation mean to you?
Ooh. So I think innovation for me is more. There's rarely this just lightning bolt and things happen, right? Innovation is just the grueling process of incremental improvements, and sometimes you're lucky enough to like have a few increments line up and you make a jump. But it's never one big jump. It doesn't happen all at once. It's like, oh, this, sometimes things will turn over quickly, but it's really a process, and you gotta want it. It doesn't happen on its own.
Yeah. More than agree. Those 1% improvements, that's what creates that snowball going downhill that when you look back, it seems like you made a huge jump, but the day in and day out, you don't even realize necessarily that you have made a ton of
And most
progress.
days it feels like you're losing. That's what I.
Yeah. That's right. Are you controlling the snowball, or is the snowball about to come to you and roll you down? How do people find out more information and connect with you?
So for me, I work for Siplast. We have a number of air and water barrier products, a thermal insulation that drive towards energy efficiency. So for those kinds of solutions, at cplast.com/BE. For me, it's Ben Meyer at cplast.com.
Awesome. Final question for you. If I could give you all construction power and you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing in the industry, what would you pick to innovate?
Oh, I think it would be just automated building zoning code evaluations. I spent so much of my life on feasibility, and I think even 10 years ago, we had the capabilities to essentially do all of your code review sheets and all of your feasibility buildable areas analysis automatically. And I think those things should be off the table in terms of what we spend time doing and what we spend time arguing about. The fact that there's whole approval processes that take months, years longer to essentially understand what we already know.
Mm-hmm.
Like, these are very knowable, solvable things. And then at the other side of it is as that gets automated, all of the energy code, all the standards, all the buildings, those are very easy to apply to a knowable solution.
Yeah. Do you see AI coming in and helping fill some of that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think if the only thing that will keep AI out is bureaucracy, our willingness to accept the answers we already know exist.
Yeah.
I mean, that's for me. That I went through a lot of zoning codes, zoning boards. These are math problems. There's not a lot of debate that needs to happen in terms
Mm.
of what's buildable and what the lot lines are. The politics are important in terms of what should we be doing, but that's future oriented. That's not necessarily what are we doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Well, Ben, thanks so much for taking the time and joining the show today.
Absolutely, it's good talking to you.